All right, everybody, welcome to Sober Banter. My name's Rachel, and I am hosting solo, but I am not solo. Today, I have Tim Lineaweaver, not only a dad in recovery, a grandfather in recovery, but also works as a therapist in recovery. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm glad to be here.
What is your sobriety date?
It is August 27th, 1984.
1984. That is 4 decades of sobriety. Congratulations.
Thank you. I just celebrated 40 years last August.
How did that feel picking up? Did you get a chip?
I ordered my own trip. It's interesting when I kind of normalized recovery in my life for many years. I didn't celebrate except kind of mentally, if that makes sense. I'd be like, oh, I have X number of years today, but 40 was a big number. I wanted to just celebrate that a little bit. So it was great. My kids came from all their far-flung places. My grandkids came and we had a lot of friends over, and it was just a really nice kind of celebration, and it made me feel really good. Yeah.
That's a big accomplishment. Did your kids see you drink, or were you sober by the time?
Let's see. My daughter's first year, I was still addicted. I was absent a lot from her life. I'd be in and out.
Well, at 1 years old, though?
Well, let's see. She would have been 1 year and 2 months is when I went to treatment. And since then, we had my stepson, and then my other son was born. So they have not seen me drinking or using. Thank God.
My son was 2 when I got sober.
Uh-huh.
Didn't go to treatment. I have 2 nieces. One, I was drinking when she was born, and it was pretty bad. And then the other one, when she was born, it was really surreal because I'm like, this is someone who will never see her aunt drink. Like, I was holding her sober, and I'm just like, I can say, and it was special. It felt really cool. And not to say that my other niece, obviously, she's my first. Like, it was still very special, but it's really different.
Yeah, it is. It totally is.
And my mom is sober. She got sober when I turned 21. My son was her first grandson, and she says being a sober grandma is definitely the biggest blessing. And it's hard, though, being new in recovery as a parent. So what was that like back in, like, take me back to 1984?
I grew up in an alcoholic home. My father was a real, what we would call a chronic alcoholic. He was sort of known for his drinking. He was an interesting guy. He was a writer, fished, hunted. He wrote for Sports Illustrated for 4 years, had some medical complications, lost the job. We moved up to Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and his alcoholism had a really big effect on me. And I started to drink when I was 13. I smoked pot the same year. I was started to smoke cigarettes when I was 12. By the time I was probably in my late teens, I was an early to mid-stage alcoholic, started using cocaine. Long story short, by the time 1984 rolled around, I had really blown up my life, ended up divorced, tried to get custody back of my daughter and visitation and stuff. And she was kind of at least the initial motivation for that.
I was gonna say my son too. Like, I feel that
And probably you can probably speak to this too. For me, it was sort of like, okay, I know what I went through with my dad. Do I want to put my kids through that? No, I don't. I want it to be different. And that was at least one of the things that really called me to recovery.
yeah. And my dad is also what you say, currently chronic alcoholic.
Uh,
I looked in the mirror and I was exactly what I'd swore I wouldn't be.
that's I had the exact same experience.
Best thing that ever happened, though.
I mean, that's the downside, but there's the upside. I came home. I'd been on a binge for a couple of days. I came home. My wife was understandably very upset. My first wife, I was like, "Where the hell have you been? And what are you doing?" And I exploded, and I was rooting around in the refrigerator for a beer, and I had a jar of mustard in my hand for some reason. I flung it against the wall, and it exploded. My daughter burst into gasping tears. I walked out of the kitchen, and there happened to be a mirror in the hall. I looked at myself, and it was like, oh my God, I looked just like my father when he would be raging. And it was like, I didn't get sober immediately after that, but not long after that I did. And I really had that feeling of like, I'm really losing my grip on becoming what I said I would never become. And that was another motivation for getting into recovery.
When you were in early sobriety, I mean, phones were not the way it is now. Technology wasn't the way it is now. So how did early recovery, like, what did that look like for you?
I tell people that for me, early recovery was kind of a rock fight in a sense, because by the time I had made the decision to get sober, the unmanageability, as they say, of my life was really, I was separated from my wife, soon to be divorced. The IRS came after me for back taxes. All I had was a high school diploma. And guess what my line of work was? I was a bartender. They were pretty tough circumstances, but I would also say some real beneficial gains that kept me in it. And I should also mention I craved a ton too. Like I would just go through the day craving. My way of coping with that was to eat ice cream. So that kind of, but I would also have these really wonderful moments where, oh my God, I feel kind of like a whole person here. Oh my God, this music I'm listening to right now is so great. Like there was sort of a spirituality to it that was really encouraging. I also was lucky. I had a very empathetic, non-judgmental therapist that was really encouraging. And sometimes I would go to her and I'd be like, oh my God, my life sucks. I'm getting divorced, the IRS, like, what am I going to do? And she would say, keep with it. Don't quit. It's going to get better. Keep going. And she was right. It did a lot better. Yeah.
Did you go through AA, or you kind of did it with the therapist where that's where you went through kind of the trauma work?
Well, my approach was all of the above. I grew up in an environment that, as you touched on earlier, it wasn't really about being a sober person. Alcoholic home. I hung out with, in the bars. I was involved in dealing cocaine. The idea of going to therapy was really kind of radical, but I was desperate, or I actually went to treatment. She kept encouraging, you need to go to treatment, you need to do more for your recovery. I'm like, no, I don't think I need to. And I would relapse and so on. So I went to treatment. In those days, it was sort of the Minnesota model. You detox and then do 30 days. I came home. I did therapy, individual therapy with her. I did group therapy, and I did AA and NA. There was a little NA meeting, but then I went to. It was just sort of beginning. It wasn't as big as it was now. And I did a ton of meetings. I did group therapy bit by bit. The trauma stuff kind of leaked out to my therapist as I got more comfortable talking to her. I just kind of loaded myself up with support. One way I like to tell it is when I was in treatment after like 2.5, 3 weeks, I was like, hey, if I could just stay here the rest of my life, I think I could be sober. Yeah.
It'd be so easy.
But I had a secondary thought, which was, okay, what is making me feel that way? Well, individual therapy, group therapy, meetings, so structure. I did a ton of meetings for like 3.5, 4 years. And I did therapy for even longer than that. And it paid off.
Especially the trauma of growing up in an alcoholic home, because I had 2 alcoholic parents. I still haven't been able to go to adult children's. I've been to like 3 meetings, and they wreck me so hard that even my therapist is like, let's just not push that yet, because we're not there yet. Like the very first chapter, the idea of like, you didn't know what kind of home you were going to come home to. Was it a mad drunk? Was it a sad drunk? Was it a happy? And
yeah,
that hypervigilance lives with me still.
I can relate to that. Yeah, certainly.
I am in school. I only had a high school diploma too when I got sober, and I've gone back to school. Originally was like, yeah, I'm going to be a counselor, addiction counselor with one-on-one. And I've kind of leaned back a little bit. How do you separate your recovery from helping others with their trauma?
It can be tough. I don't believe that there's only one way to get clean and sober.
I don't either.
A lot of people take different paths than the one I took. And my thing is, at the end of the day, okay, if you're sober, then you're in recovery. Good for you, and however that works for you, it works. So we don't need to stress about it. Having said that, I think that one typical mistake that I made, and that other newly people who want to be sober make, is they don't do enough to really support themselves. And it can be kind of like throwing a wet sponge at a thick concrete wall and expecting it to tumble over. You need a sledgehammer for that thing. Yes, that can be frustrating, but there's also nowadays, I think, treatment is better and more refined, and there are ways of working with people where they can, you sort of see where they're at, and then you counsel them accordingly. Sometimes people arrive at my door and they're really ready to change, they're really to embrace it and go. And other times, maybe their husband or wife or girlfriend, boyfriend has directed them, you need to go get therapy. So I just try to have a broad approach to people and meet wherever they are on their journey so far, kind of thing, and then help them accordingly.
And this is going to sound probably a little silly, but I recently watched ER after Loving the Pit. And I see one of the characters after 5 years relapses, and she has these chronic relapses, some worse than others. And I thought to myself, how as a counselor would I be able to, watch someone relapse and try and convince me that, oh, they're not alcoholic anymore. And this is only through a TV show. So I was wondering how that works when you're working with someone who's like in front of you.
Well, it certainly can be painful. And I've seen people relapse who've had, many years of sobriety, and sometimes it's difficult for them to get back for whatever reason. I certainly would tell you that it can be really painful for me to see that, experience it, because usually by the time something like that happens, I've been with somebody for a while. And so it's
not immediate that it falls apart.
no.
So maybe you can even speak to that, because I think people don't hear that enough, that you think, oh, I could go back, and you try, but it's not like your life will instantly fall apart. But it typically, if you're alcoholic, at least like me, I know I'll end up back right where I started, if not worse.
The first step talks about powerlessness over your substance. And for me, I take that step every day. I think about it. I wake up into my day and I just do a quick kind of ask of myself, am I still powerless today? Yep. And the idea behind that for me is just that, like, if I am powerless, it means that whatever the problems were when I was using before, if you want to roll the dice again, bad things are going to happen. And not only that, I ask myself, are you happy with your life today? And the answer to that would be yes. I feel blessed and grateful. And I also try to encourage people to kind of think along the same lines. If you don't like the word powerless, that's okay. Think of something else. Like I have problems when I drink or use. It doesn't have to be you're an addict, you're an alcoholic, you're powerless. It's if you want to use those terms, that's fine. I was sort of raised up in AA where those terms were strictly used, and so I use them. But it's important, I think, to just remember feeling when I had gone to my daughter's christening back in 1984 in August. I ended up in a blackout. I behaved horribly. I can tell you the details if you want them, but just trust me on that. And I woke up the next day and I felt so deeply in despair and lost. It was kind of my come to Jesus moment with myself. I was like, Tim, you don't have an idea of how to live a decent life. You need help, and you probably need more help than you've been giving yourself. So I picked up the phone and I called my therapist, and I said, I need help. I need to go to treatment. And she was like, oh, I'm so glad. And she said, don't go anywhere. I'm going to call you back. And she called me back and said, found you a bed in treatment in a good place, but you have to wait till Thursday. It was like Sunday morning. A few days later, I packed up my gear and off I went. I feel like that treatment still pays dividends to this day.
That's a great way to look at it. I love that. For your work wise, do you kind of say like you focus in trauma addiction, and do you see that those two almost always intertwine, or?
A high percentage of the time. And you can, if you look at statistics, you see different stuff, but all of it is mostly above 50%, 70%. And the other thing about that is that those statistics may not be as high as they might be, because some people just don't even want to talk about trauma. And I was like that in the beginning. Like, I'm not talking about that stuff. I'm not telling anybody. I'm actually writing a book now, and I've been working on a chapter that was sort of pivotal in my life, and it details an incident of sexual abuse that I suffered. When that happened, I said to myself, I am never telling anybody about this ever again. I'm putting it in a box, and I'm taking that box and putting it in another box, and I'm going to chain it up, and I'm going to throw it away. And I did, until I was probably about 29 or 30. And then I was sitting in group therapy, and the topic became about sexual abuse. And I just sort of blurted out that it happened to me as well. That was so finally, it happened when I was pretty young, and it took, 2 decades or more for me to be able to talk about it. I think that therapeutically, you have to be cautious about working with people on their trauma. It's sort of like what you were saying, like sometimes it's a little early. What's the main thing right now? Well, the main thing is that we keep sober, stabilize your life. And when we're ready, there's no rush on that, then we can start to deal with that as well. And so for me, kind of my traumatic experiences trickles out over time.
As I've been sponsored, I went through the steps.
Yep.
At least in the beginning for me, I thought I'm not going to need a therapist after, because it was so encouraging that the steps will fix your life. Everything's fixable as long as you work the steps and you stay dedicated. And I was that way. I don't know if you worked as a sponsor or sponsee, but I've seen sponsors try and take on things that really should be left to a therapist. But you can't tell anyone anything. There's no rules. And you just see it and you're like, man, that guy does not seem like he's qualified to give that kind of advice.
Yeah. I was lucky. My sponsor kind of drew a line between demarcation of what he felt helped me with and the other stuff. I never felt like my therapist and my sponsor are at cross purposes, and I'm confused. It was always pretty clear cut. And I think you're right. I think, AA, NA, Refuge, Recovery, there's so many great self-help, Smart Recovery.
And they're amazing. I'm not trying to knock that.
I mean, absolutely. I owe a huge debt to AA and NA, but
I also owe a huge debt to my therapist, who's now doing the deeper trauma work.
You don't want somebody trying to deal with trauma that isn't highly trained. You should be trained before you're dealing with that. And the other thing is, it's sort of like, if you rip off the Band-Aid, you never know what could happen. And I've seen some people just get overwhelmed. They go back out again, start drinking. So you don't want that to happen.
What would you recommend to someone if they were working with a sponsor, an AA, and the Band-Aid gets ripped off and now they're like, yeah, I want to go drink? What would you recommend the steps that they do instead of going to drink?
Find a therapist. Yes. Find a trauma. Sometimes like my therapist wasn't, formally trauma informed. I mean, but that's one type of person you could look for. It really has the experience, but she was really gifted and empathetic and non-judgmental. And she had this knack for when to push and when to sort of, comfort. But I think, if be careful with a sponsor that's really trying to push too hard on the trauma stuff.
Well, you can just feel very vulnerable, because you're newly sober and now we're trying to get what this person has. And there is a huge vulnerability that.
Absolutely. You're vulnerable, and your primary coping strategy, which is substance, has been removed. You don't yet have maybe the coping skills that you'll get over time to deal with the intensity of your feeling. My first year of recovery was really emotional. I had a lot of anger. I had a lot of sadness and depression, and a lot of guilt and shame and remorse, all that stuff. And that's why I needed to support myself as heavily as I did. And again, my therapist was a very big piece of that.
So how did you decide that you wanted to go into trauma, and how long did it take you to get your degree?
What I did was I gave myself 2 years and I got sober and sort of got stable. I'm like, okay, I'm going back to school. Now, when I was a kid, I was a terrible student. School made me feel like anxious. It was a place with too many people, too many rules, too many opportunities to mess up and not do well. I had tried college 2 times before and just dropped out. And I said to myself, I'm going to get my bachelor's degree or I'm going to die trying. So I went back to a small community college when I was 30. So I was 2 years sober. I took just like one course. And then the next semester I took two, and then I got up to four. But the challenge was I was still working full time. I had my daughter on weekends. I had sort of reestablished that. And I was going to school pretty much full time. It took me like 4.5 years to get through undergrad. I was working at a restaurant in Boston, going to UMass Boston, and on Sunday, I would work a double shift. So I'd be working at the restaurant from 9 a.m. until 2 in the morning. I would go home, get home around 3, fall asleep, get up at 9, go to my classes. And then that following night, I would work again. So it was just a really crazy, challenging thing, but best experience. I was doing it for me. I wasn't doing it because everybody else thought I should go to college. I was doing it for me. I was an English major with a psychology minor, and I took a creative writing certificate. And so it took me about 4.5 years. Then I took a year off and slept. And then I went to graduate school after that. That was another 3.
But I think I'm about on that pace right now, is that, and now I'm in year 2 and I'm halfway through my trying to get my undergrad. And it's just, I try to give myself grace though. I'm like, it's hard. And
Give yourself grace because, it's hard.
in recovery,
It is. And be in recovery. Exactly.
that can sometimes be its own job.
Yeah. Totally.
So you were sober bartending.
I was. I had child support and I was broke and I had a lot of debt. And it's the only skill that I knew that I had where I could earn the kind of money to kind of keep everything afloat, just barely. I had no health insurance. I was just like, I was struggling. And I wouldn't make that suggestion to anybody else. It's trying to be sober.
I know a lot of people now, though, like it is very common. I think employers like hiring sober bartenders because they know they won't steal the liquor.
Exactly.
When I left serving, I couldn't stop shaking. And I couldn't carry a glass of alcohol without just trembling. That was the problem at the time. It's not my drinking, it's that. I would have to take like 2 or 3 shots to get the shakes to go away after I had my son. Like, it was so bad. And so it's really impressive that you made it through. I don't know if other people struggle with it, but I do know there are a ton of sober bartenders.
There are. One thing about it is I would see something happening. I'd be like, yep, that's me. If I was drinking, that kind of thing, like, oh my God. So it was sort of a cautionary tale. And I was really excited when I left it though, because I had, when I was young and drinking and really exciting and fun, like that's where the party was. But then it got really old for me.
Yeah. For anyone listening, what do people most often misunderstand about trauma in recovery?
Well, I think people that don't have trauma in recovery don't understand that trauma often drives recovery. And we were talking about earlier, high percentage of the time. And there's a lot of judgment around that. Oh, look at that drunk or look at that junkie. I think that type of, those types of thoughts and kind of ways of labeling people ignore the fact that practically every addict or alcoholic or person with substance use disorders that's being driven by trauma that is painful and difficult, and those people deserve our respect. When somebody gets clean and sober, we're really restoring them to the person that they were meant to be and the person that they could be. And as you've touched on earlier, those people make the best employees. They show up on time, they kill it, they're smart, they are empathetic. We need to really work with people and help them forward in the same way that I was helped, and I assume in the same way that you've been helped as well.
Absolutely. I think that was one thing I really related heavily to Bill W. That near the end, he was trying to find a way to help those people with so much trauma that they can't get out, just didn't have that moment of that look in the mirror, the who am I? Because the trauma is so heavy. It's like, how can we get people to a point to where we can get them to see that it's a disease talking? And it's so hard that you can't force it on anyone. Because if you could, I'm sure there's lots of people that would.
Yes. Well, I think one thing that I try to do, send a message to clients and other people that are trying to be in recovery and dealing with trauma, that you can deal with it, with both the trauma and the addictions. A lot of times, sometimes as therapists, we kind of use the scare stuff too much. Like, oh my God, if you relapse, these terrible things are gonna happen, and that there's truth in that. But the other thing that we need to send a message is, if you deal with your addictions and then you deal with your trauma, your life is going to get so much better. I tell people, I've never had anybody who's gotten into recovery and stayed there and sort of dealt with all their stuff come back to me and say, you lied.
Yeah, no one.
This is awful. It's like no good. I'm going back out there and I'm drinking, because you just don't hear that. You hear people are grateful that they're able to reach their potential, where before they were stuck and struggling, and they achieve independence and happiness and good relationships. There's so much good stuff there. So
I think I heard someone say, they were like, the liquor store will always be open tomorrow. If I'm so wrong,
right.
I've never met one person in recovery that was like, being sober was the worst. It's always like, I'm so grateful I didn't go drink alcoholically. That was one thing that is also convincing that I wanted to go work in the recovery addiction world. Is it is a very rewarding field, that you're like, once you see someone that you were able to help pull out, just like you, because I know it's like being in it. So I know the misery, and it's like helping others come out of that. But like my dad does not want help. He's miserable, but he will also claim he doesn't want to change it. He wants to stay. He has no desire to do anything about it. So it's like, if you change your mind, I'm here. But so how have you seen it change too? Because for decades, not only are you working in the field, you're in recovery yourself. What have you seen change the most?
The treatment field, I think treatment is a lot more effective and various. In other words, there's a lot different kind of modes of treatment that you can access. There's, PHP programs, there's IOP programs. There are, I think, more therapists with expertise in addictions and trauma. There's EMDR, there's, tapping. There's all kinds of different ways of dealing with stuff.
What did you start out with? Like talk therapy or?
Yeah, it was just talk therapy with my therapist. She was amazing though. And it was so, I remember my first day, I just walked in there and I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. And what is this? It was just so contrary to my life to actually go talk to a person about my problems. You don't do that. You just drink and just get hammered, and that's how you cope. So, but she was just this very kind of confident, self-possessed woman, but in a way that wasn't like, I can't talk to her. It was like, and she was so gifted and in terms of her empathy. And I think if I had felt any vibe of judgment or something like that, I would have just left. I'm not doing this. And something about her that just, even though, I was kind of fighting her on stuff, I did keep going back, and I was, roughly honest with her. And so it worked. And nowadays, I think there's a lot more available out there. That's a good thing. The bad thing, the other side of that, and I don't know how much you've talked about this.
What's the bad side?
Okay, there's a lot more money in treatment, so there's more corruption.
That's a good point.
This sort of, we need heads in beds kind of mentality of just loading people into treatment and then doing everything you can to hold them there, to my mind, is problematic and not good.
Yeah, and I got to interview a therapist, and the ethical challenge was with insurance, having someone who wants help, but they're like 1 day sober. So technically they won't qualify to get into treatment. And she said, it's really hard to be like, if you just like went and took a sip and came right back, we could get you in and be fully covered. But you can't say that to an addict. You can't tell an addict, hey, just go relapse really quickly. You don't know that they'll come back. They might not have
Yeah.
that same the way that things have to be worded or how things are timed or how you answer a question, even if it's not honest and the counselor knows it's not honest, that can shut down a claim being covered or not covered. And she said it is a real ethical pull when you're sitting across from someone that you know needs help. And you're like, do I forge the document? Do I, just do I tell them? And that was the ethical battle she talked about. And that opened my eyes like, wow.
Yeah. I've worked on inpatient programs probably for about a third of my career. It's really tough work, really tough in a lot of different ways and for a lot of different reasons. But I was working with a young person who had been in Florida, and he told me that what he was doing was he was cycling in and out of treatment. The treatment program would give him $1,000 if he would go to detox and stay for his, for whatever his insurance would cover. And he had medical necessity, so he fit the criteria. So he would go in, come out, they'd give him $1,000. He would go on a run for like a week and then come back in, get another $1,000, and so on and so forth. And I was just blown away by that. Like, oh my God.
I mean, addicts are brilliant. I'm telling you, like, and I've
We
said,
find a way, don't we?
but the good news is if you're listening and you're not sober, like it is even more powerful in sobriety. And I think it's the magic that you see if someone hears a recovered addict hears someone needs help, it's the quickest phone call you'll ever get. We will stop everything down and be like, how can we help? Here's where we can tell you. And if we're not available, we immediately know 10 other people that are. And again, if this didn't work and being sober was really miserable, that's not how it would go. It would be hard but everyone who has been in addiction and then is able to get to the other side it's just not, you can't see it until you're there.
Yeah, you can't. I was convinced that it was going to be a joyless black and white. It's going to be miserable the rest of my life. I have found that is just so not true. Life is, full of joy. I love to have the full kind of scope of my emotions. Everything that recovery has given me, I'm so grateful for. And I think that's the core message for people. You can do it if you really work at it, and if you do it, you will be very happy and fulfilled. And we just have to keep sending that message out there.
Absolutely. And I think growing up in an alcoholic home, because alcohol was very normal when I got sober, like it was so much around that I didn't think there was anywhere you couldn't have it, So I was like, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? Like my
Yeah.
entire life, there's always a drink around. And I've found in sobriety, number one, alcohol is not everywhere and it's not in my home. And while there might be a hard moment, because I'm now changing my norm, I'm going from alcohol is my solution for pretty much everything to sobriety. And I had to find like meditation, be able to sit with it. And the feeling was very uncomfortable a
Yes.
lot of times.
Yes.
But there was never a time where, like you'd said, I wake up that day, I can do it for 24 hours. I've committed today that no matter what happens, even if my worst case scenario happened, I will not drink today. As someone who's, again, just alcohol everywhere all the time, I kind of thought I was like breaking societal norms. I do still remember just from growing up in an alcoholic home how normal it felt for 27 years of my life.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I mean, alcohol in the house, alcohol is everywhere. Everyone was drinking, and and
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and it did seem like alcohol was everywhere. And I also remember you touched on this when you were just talking about it. But for me, like I would in those days, all my friends were alcoholics and drug addicts, and I was very, that was a very centered part of my life. So I didn't. I would go to a meeting and I'd be like, oh, this was like an oasis of these people understand me
Yeah.
and they understand what I need and I can get it here. And so if I am craving or if I'm disturbed by something, AA, NA, and now there's a lot of other programs that work as
Any
well.
group of people that's
Yes,
like minded.
fellowship, right? Like this is sort of one of the antidotes to addictions.
With the resources today, which back when you got sober, probably were not as available. Like the sources were pretty much AA, NA, or therapy, or like treatment centered. But today, like you can find a group pretty much anywhere online. You don't even have to go in person, but even in person, I mean, there's so many just within my little circle. And that did really help me in the early days because I start to forget anyway. So I can imagine after 40 years, there's like, oh yeah, something I do remember being like triggered and having to go run to a meeting, which sounds
Oh, yeah.
crazy today. I am curious as we can kind of wrap up, but your kids, how does that work since some of them haven't seen you drink? What do you do? How do you talk to your kids about it?
Well, I wanted to talk to my kids about it because they have a genetic predisposition. Alcoholism is very strong on my paternal side. So my grandfather, my father, my brother, and I all had addictive issues. And so it doesn't guarantee that they will develop addictions, but there is that predisposition. And so I talked to them starting pretty young. I tried not to be too heavy-handed with it because, if you just constantly push on kids, then they're more apt to go out and do the thing that you don't want them to do. But I just said, like as they got into their teen years, you're going to start running into opportunities to drink, or somebody might offer you a pill or a substance or a powder, and you need to be prepared for that. And we need to talk about it. I talked a lot about the difference between kind of responsible drinking versus going out to get kind of shattered, and how that kind of abuse can lead to dependence. And so far, knock on wood, none of them have developed addictions. The other difference for them was that they weren't traumatized in the same way that I was and that you were, right? So that they don't have that driver. And another thing I told them, which I think was important, was there are certain substances that you should never experiment. Heroin and cocaine.
I was say cocaine is so bad apparently. Like
Yeah,
I've done it many
yeah.
times and I didn't know till I went to school how it'll never leave my dopamine in my brain. Like that's forever gonna be there.
Well, that was my experience. Like I snorted cocaine, got addicted that way, but then when I smoked it, within a year, I destroyed my life. And so I tell them, don't mess with those drugs, and I also kind of left the door open. If you guys want to talk about something, I'm not going to punish you or get mad at you. Let's talk and really, kind of determine what makes sense for you. So far, so good.
Genetically, everyone in our my family has addiction. Like literally both sides.
I mean, the not traumatizing your kids is a really great big first step in making sure that they're parented, better than we were. And I think my I can't even really call it parenting. He was a lot like your dad, just drank himself to death. Didn't want help. It's not happening. But a lot of stuff that he did with me, I was like, okay, I'm not doing that because that didn't help me at all, you know?
I have noticed, and this is where the forgiveness of being an addict and understanding like the person and the disease is that there are some things that I know my dad was doing, or my mom, because my mom drank my whole life too, that they were drinking. And there's no way they would have done those things had they not just been obliterated, had they been present. Obviously, I make mistakes as a parent, but like not the kinds of things I grew up with, but that's only because it was fueled by alcohol. I think if my parents weren't sick, I don't think the extent of the things that happened would have happened.
Yes. And I think it's probably likely, you tell me, but I know that my dad also had trauma. I don't know the details of it, but I know that his relationship with his father was really traumatic for him. So I can think it like get kind of mad about things my dad did, but I'm like, okay, he had trauma too. So,
And that's where I'm like, I'm not mad at him. Oh, one thing I wanted to ask.
yes.
Do you still have like drinking dreams, or have you had drinking dreams ever? Or what's that like even 40 years now?
I don't have them nearly as frequently as I used to, and they're kind of recurring dreams. And in the dream, I usually have some cocaine on me and some alcohol, and I'm dealing with my wife or kids, and I'm trying to get away from them so I can go
Always trying to
use.
escape. That's
Yeah,
always what my therapist is
yeah.
like. Yep, trying to escape.
Trying to escape, trying to move the chess pieces around so I can do what I want to do. And I'm thinking like, I haven't really been sober. I've been lying all this time. So there's this kind of guilt and remorse going along with it. And but I don't care because I just want to get high. And then I wake up and I'm like, oh wait, oh my God, I'm sober. Thank God. So it's as unnerving as those dreams can be. They kind of serve a purpose for me, which is, do you really want to go back to that kind of stuff? No, I don't. It was a tough dream to have, but maybe there's a silver lining there.
Yeah, it's your repurpose of, I'm not going to take a drink today because that dream was not fun.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah. My husband has drinking dreams. I'm sober in all my dreams, and I usually show my tattoo, and I have the little AA symbol, but I had them in early sobriety, but I do have ones about being trapped. I will tell you that is my theme. I cannot escape, and I'm scared, and I'm trying to people please, and I can't figure, but it's usually I find my husband drinking, and I don't do the whole dream theory, but we got sober on the same day. So, I mean, we were both
That's so cool.
who's going to cave first. Like, he told me his whole goal in the beginning was he was going to outlast me because I'm the true alcoholic. And eventually Rachel's going to be like, let's go get Jameson. We both outlasted each other.
And you have the same sobriety day.
We do. We do.
Yeah. You do like a huge, how do you celebrate?
First year we went to a nice dinner. The second, we've done 3. We're coming up on 4 different each time. It's busy with Evan.
Yeah. Cool.
And it's Christmas. So we got sober the week of Thanksgiving, November 22nd of 21. Now, technically, my last drink was the 21st. His was the 22nd. But we say our sobriety date's the 22nd because we took our Desire chips at that meeting, at that 6 p.m. meeting. And so my sobriety date's like when I took my Desire chips, same for him. But he did drink on his lunch break that day. I stayed sober with the baby, promising my mom I'd go to this meeting. And I'm like, it's not going to work. This is stupid. It's not my problem. I'm depressed. I did drinking, and I heard what I needed to hear in that meeting and haven't had a drink since. Thank God.
Right.
So you're working on writing a book, a memoir?
Yep. I'm kind of putting the final touches on it. It's about my life and my family and growing up on Cape Cod back in the 1970s, and about my trauma, about my recovery. And I'm looking for a publisher. So if there's anybody out there that wants a good book on addictions, call me up, email me something.
Yeah, there's quite a few authors I've had. So that would probably be very likely that if any one of even previous guests, since all of the people I've talked to are addiction memoirs, please. So Tim, and the great way to get a hold of you through Substack. Yep. That's where you're doing your current writing.
Yep.
Any other ways?
Email me at tnt410@aol.com.
And I'll put it in the show notes as well. Grateful that you came on here and shared your experience.
Love it. Really enjoyed it.
And your strength, your hope. Absolutely. And again, so knowing that you're looking for a publisher and working on the memoir, and those memoirs really help people. And I know that, and talking to different authors, it's really cool to see a review of someone they do not know. And they're like, wow, this book just really spoke to me and spoke to, especially with trauma. That's such a big one and one that people don't like to talk about. So reading it can be a really great intro. So
Yeah. And I know that when I was getting sober, it really helped me to, that somebody was being upfront about their addictions and how they got sober. Like I love to read about that. Even you still do now.
yeah, me too. I was gonna say it hasn't gone away from me yet. I'm still very like connect with someone, and you're like, that's my story, and it feels very like you're not alone, and you are anyone listening, you're not alone. I know that for a fact. Thank you for listening, and I will put everything else in the show notes. And hope you have a good rest of your day.
And you too. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.